What is it? What is it about humanity that wants to go to all the details and stuff and listen? You know, these guys like Fauci get up there and start talking. You know, he doesn't know anything really about anything, and I'd say that to his face. Nothing. The man thinks you can take a blood sample and stick it in an electron microscope, and if it's got a virus in there, you'll know it. He doesn't understand electron microscopy, and he doesn't understand medicine, and he should not be in a position like he's in. Most of those guys up there on the top are just total administrative people, and they don't know anything about what's going on at the bottom. But the simplest person on the planet can say, well, if we know that this disease is caused by HIV, how do we know that? Who figured it out? Is it in the Bible, you know? Or is it in the Journal of the American Medical Association? Is it in some place where we can all look at it? That's what science is supposed to do. It's empirical science. That's what we do. Not true anymore. That scientists never lie. That scientists will always be honest, and that they aren't each other's competitor, that they're each other's colleague. You know, the way we do, the way papers get published, the way grants get funded, all of that stuff is like ancient. It's the structure that worked in the 17th century maybe, but it doesn't work now. It works very, very much against science. Do the same thing that we do to cancer, but we're just going to keep on doing it until you die. And hopefully it's going to prolong your life. Well, if it doesn't prolong your life, what they look for is surrogate markers. Now, have you heard that term battered about? Surrogate markers means, well, it doesn't seem to do anything for the disease, but it does every now and then do something for the level of CD4 cells that we measure. Immunologists would tell you that CD4 levels was a surrogate marker for anything until we know more about it. But that's what they're using. That's what the FDA is saying, yeah. You don't have to show that it helps them. These protease inhibitors, the same thing. You don't have to show that it helps the patient. You don't have to show a single life saved. All you have to do is show some little clinical indicator has changed in a way that somebody is hoping is going to make you better. But I would say the answer to the question is the antibody test was something they could quickly develop. That's what Gallo did, and sell, and so he did. And he said, we're going to make a lot of money off this. Everybody in the world is going to have to take this test to find out who's going to die of the plague. And a lot of people did take it, and he got a lot of money for it. I mean, and there's all kind of people all the way down the line getting paid for doing something that's absolutely insane. For if I could show you that it did cause AIDS, then you could ask me that question, and I could say, I don't know why it does it that way, but it does cause it because here's the facts. You give that stuff to somebody who doesn't have AIDS, he gets AIDS, or some experiment that showed you definitely that.
Yeah, but you can't show me an animal model.
Well, I can't do that, can I? Because if every damn chimp that's ever been injected with it, you know, it's lived in the chimp for a while. Chimp gets rid of it, makes antibodies. By definition, the chimp's got AIDS at that point. If he starts to if it's uterine cancer and it's a female chimp, he's now got AIDS. But none of those chimps died of AIDS. I mean, they're still alive and happy. There's no evidence. But if there were evidence. See, if there were, this is one of the things I think, if I could produce evidence that HIV caused AIDS, it could cause it by some weird mechanism that we never heard of. Totally implausible.
But if you're saying
new biology, it wouldn't matter if I had evidence, but there isn't any evidence.
But if you're suggesting, for instance, as Fauci suggested, and Gallo and all the rest, that it's sexually transmitted, all right, I went out and I charted for the last 5 years the prevalence and increase of sexually transmitted disease, chlamydia, syphilis, gonorrhea, herpes, and papilloma, and trichomonas. I then charted in the same risk groups AIDS, HIV infection. Here is sexually transmitted diseases going like this,
up, yeah.
And here's AIDS going down.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's pretty good proof that it's not a sexually transmitted disease, isn't it? It was. I mean, why was it a sexually transmitted disease? Why did they say it was sexually transmitted? First thing they said, this is a homosexual disease, right? Yeah. So if you look back at the early kind of discussions of it, it's probably anal intercourse, right? We don't want to talk about it at dinner, but that's probably what it's caused by, right? So somebody in the CDC probably said, you know what, if that's the way it's transmitted, then Congress is going to say, good, we don't need those guys anyhow. We're not going to spend a lot of money trying to cure them of this thing that's caused by their bad habit, right? I mean, there's just not going to be a big public outcry to do anything at all about it. If it's just caused by needles, or it's just caused by homosexual activities, you're not going to really get a long, sustained public outcry against it, and nobody's going to want to spend $6 billion a year. They're going to say, well, we really didn't like those people anyhow. The pendulum's swinging back toward the 90s. Great. I can't think of a better solution to the homosexual problem than a disease that'll kill them all. I mean, there would be congressmen that would talk about that quietly, not on television. So the CDC had to say, we can't say that. We got to say it's got to be heterosexually transmitted. There's no proof that it's transmitted at all at that point. So why not just say, well, it's heterosexually transmitted too? It must be in semen. And when they looked for it in semen, they didn't find it. They had no evidence that it was sexually transmitted or any other way transmitted. They just said it because that made it a plague. And the CDC needed one. The CDC hadn't had a good plague since polio. Their funding was probably going to be cut back if they didn't come up with one. The guy that was the head of the CDC, in fact, wrote memos that have been obtained, where he describes this as hot stuff. Just like they're playing with this ridiculous Ebola virus stuff, trying to frighten people there. That's like Coop probably loves it. He'd love to see Ebola come into Florida and start sweeping across the southeast. He could take his uniformed troops. They could have barricades. It could be just like in the movie. Those guys have got an agenda, which is not what we would like them to have, being that we pay for them to take care of our health in some way. They've got a personal kind of agenda. They make up their own rules as they go. They change them when they want to. And they smugly, like Tony Fauci, does not mind going on television in front of the people that pay his salary and lie directly into the camera.
I knew Linus Pauling for a long time. I found it interesting that of all the Nobel laureates in the United States and around the world, he, having two unshared, and I'm not aware of any other American to have two unshared Nobel Prizes, was never respected again by mainstream medicine or science when he supported that vitamin C could cause an improvement in people with terminal cancer. And I watched how all this funding dried up, even though he was one of the founding members of the National Academy of Science. He couldn't even get a grant from them. And it took him almost 14 years just to get a mediocre grant to study cancer. Even when the Mayo Clinic supposedly reproduced his results that he had obtained at the Vale of Leven Hospital in Scotland, where he and Dr. Ewan Cameron took a group of terminally ill cancer patients, divided them in half, gave half 10,000 milligrams of vitamin C every day of their life. Another group got a placebo, and there was a statistically significant improvement in people who were receiving vitamin C. They turned around and did it at the Mayo Clinic, but they didn't use the same criteria. Pauling says don't use people who have chemotherapy, it'll knock the liver out. They use people with chemotherapy. Pauling says you have to give vitamin C every single day. They didn't. And so it was not the same study, yet they published it saying they duplicated his work. Then when they went to publish the results of what is a terribly flawed study, they didn't even give him the courtesy of saying, here's the results, would you like to examine it? And all he was given was a letter to the editor of New England Journal of Medicine long after the study. And I saw at that time how you can take one of the best and brightest in America, much as they did our greatest living scientist of this century, who was destroyed, Dr. Andrew Ivy. There was never a scientist who's been more cited in the scientific literature than Dr. Ivy. He was a jurist, he was a physician, he was a scientist, he was everything. But he supported carbamazepine, and he supported carbamazepine in a correct manner, and they destroyed him.
Don't think of it as a belief. Science isn't a set of beliefs. It's not like Methodists and Catholics. Those people, Methodists and Catholics can believe whatever they want to, and they say, I will believe it. I'll stick by my story till I die, right? I'm a Methodist, pure and simple. That's okay for that kind of stuff. Scientists are not supposed to believe anything. Scientists are supposed to have some evidence that leads them tentatively to some conclusion or to some action. They're supposed to be able to show that to other scientists, any interested person, in fact, who's willing to understand what it is that was used as evidence, should be able to say, yeah, I agree with that. That makes sense, using rules of inference that we've used since Aristotle. Okay, and it's not complicated at all. You learn it in the 6th grade. Most scientists forget it pretty quickly. But science is not a set of beliefs. I mean, there's only one belief in science that you have to retreat to commitment at a certain point. You have to say, we do believe that if A implies B and B implies C, then A implies C. And we do believe that if P is a proposition which is true, then not P is a proposition that is false. That's all we have to believe in science. The rest of it is tentative, awaiting further study. And almost every single thing that is considered to be a fact in the 20th century, in another 200,000 years, will look very silly. You know, if you just picture yourself being a real bright Egyptian mathematician and thinking that you really understand math, and then see what you'd look like from the point of view of somebody in the year 2000. Did you really understand math? Nope. Was any of it right? Nope. It was all wrong in just a little way here, a little bit there, there were things wrong with it. I wouldn't be surprised if 200,000 years ago from now, Aristotelian logic turned out to not be. You know, it's already starting to look kind of funny because of quantum mechanics. Sometimes things are true and not true at the same time. Sometimes effect precedes cause. Time isn't quite what we think it is either. Nothing is certain in science. There's no room for beliefs. Beliefs are for things where you want to have a belief that helps bolster your courage in something in order to act. So that's what religion's for. You know, there you say, I'm going to believe in something that's going to help me to get through this mess out here that I've got to get through. And I'm going to do that because it's useful for me to believe that. And the harder I believe in it, the more powerful I get in a way. Especially if I want to start bossing a lot of people around and I can get them to believe the same thing. But that's a belief.